Threat modeling is basically looking at possible attacks from an attacker's perspective, possible intrusion from an attacker's perspective. What could be the aims of the attacker? What could be the means, the methods the attackers would use? Why would the attacker want to approach this? What kind of sensitive information would they be looking for, or can they find in our environment? So think of it like this. You've got a house and you position a gate right in front. Now, the size of the gate you build will determine the kind of threat you anticipate. So many times, some people build very low fences to prevent animals from coming in. But some people build a higher fence to prevent certain kinds of other animals from coming in. And some people build really tall fences that you can barely see the building inside, because then they are trying to prevent against human threats like thieves or armed robbers or kidnappers, because then that gives some level of mystery and it gives a higher level of security, because it's harder to cross over to the other side with a taller fence. So in those three situations, they've anticipated different levels of threat. So in threat modeling, there are lots of frameworks, but one of the simple frameworks I'm going to introduce is called STRIDE. There are first letters of different stages of attack or different goals of the attacker. Threat modeling is basically looking at possible attacks from an attacker's perspective, possible intrusion from an attacker's perspective. What could be the aims of the attacker? What could be the means, the methods the attackers would use? Why would the attacker want to approach this? What kind of sensitive information would they be looking for, or can they find in our environment? And all those kind of things. So think of it like this. You've got a house and you position a gate right in front. Now, the size of the gate you build will determine the kind of threat you anticipate. So many times, some people build very low fences to prevent animals from coming in. But some people build a higher fence to prevent certain kinds of other animals from coming in. And some people build really tall fences that you can barely see the building inside, because then they are trying to prevent against human threats like thieves or armed robbers or kidnappers, because then that gives some level of mystery and it gives a higher level of security, because it's harder to cross over to the other side with a taller fence. So in those three situations, they've anticipated different levels of threat based on past experiences, or based on the data they know about the area, or based on anything really. But threat modeling really helps us know what security measures to put in place, because we are looking at our environment, at our perimeter, from the threat actor's perspective. So for example, hacking is a threat. The threat actor would be a hacker or a hacktivist, depending on the situation. So in threat modeling, there are lots of frameworks, but one of the simple frameworks I'm going to introduce is called STRIDE. There are first letters of different stages of attack or different goals of the attacker. The S in STRIDE stands for spoofing identity. So this is when you masquerade as somebody else or as a different entity. And spoofing could also be an object trying to evade detection, where a file is trying to masquerade as another type of file to bypass security. There are other forms of spoofing like MAC spoof, where an attacker assumes the MAC address of a legitimate user, also to bypass security or to associate themselves with a wireless network, or for several other reasons. There is also real-life spoofing in social engineering cases, where an individual presents themselves as a totally different person who would normally have access to that environment or to that building. So there are lots of spoofing types. There are lots of reasons an attacker would want to spoof, but it's usually either to evade detection or to gain access into a place they would normally not have access. The T stands for tampering, and this basically focuses on loss of integrity, manipulating, modifying files in an unauthorized manner. Files you're not authorized to modify, an attacker is able to modify them. So that is tampering attacks. So you're looking at the threat modeling framework from a very basic point of view, like how can the attacker, first of all, try to achieve spoofing attacks? What are the things they can try to spoof? how can we then protect against the things they can try to spoof, and how can we protect the assets from being spoofed by these people through these methods. And then we walk down and then we go through the vulnerabilities that could cause the spoofing attack to be possible. And then from determining the vulnerabilities on our network, we also go down and we determine the strengths of our network. This could be what security solutions do we have in place to mitigate the chances of this happening. So then we have this also on a record, and then we compare both of them and look at how we can patch the remaining vulnerabilities to prevent the spoofing attack. And then we've got the tampering. The same method applies to the tampering. What vulnerabilities could cause the tampering to be possible, and what strengths or what security solutions do we have in place to reduce the chances of this happening, or the likelihood of it happening, or the potential impact if it does happen. So that stands for tampering. And then we've got the R, which stands for repudiation attacks. This is basically when somebody is able to deny that they've done something or they've carried out an action. And we all know the potential risks of this, especially when we relate this back to forensics. It's not a fun experience for whoever is being accused of sending the file, deleting the file, or carrying out the action. But we've got certain mechanisms in place in certain situations, like web traffic. We've got the digital signatures when combined with PKI to achieve non-repudiation. We've got the I, which stands for information disclosure, and this focuses on confidentiality. What are the things that could lose confidentiality, and what are the things that, if the confidentiality is lost, would put the business at risk, or put the organization at risk, or put the country at risk, depending on the situation? How can they achieve this form of attack that would allow us to lose confidentiality of our information? How can they achieve disclosing sensitive information within our network and putting us at risk, putting our customers at risk, putting our data at risk, putting our clients or patients at risk, depending on the kind of organization or the kind of data we are dealing with? And we've got the D, which stands for denial of service. And this focuses on availability of our information processing systems or our assets that use the information systems, like people. Denial of service can also affect people. The D stands for denial of service, and basically, how can the attacker achieve denial of service? How can we prevent the attacker from achieving this denial of service? Based on the assets we've got, what are the possible vulnerabilities that can allow a denial of service attack to happen, and what are the security solutions we have in place that could reduce the chances of this happening or could prevent it? And then how can we make up for the vulnerabilities that are left? Are our strength and security solutions able to counter or cover for the vulnerabilities, or do we need more security solutions in place, or do we need compensating controls? And then we have the E. The E stands for escalation of privilege, where a regular user or a user who should not have certain level of access is able to upgrade themselves to a higher level of privilege. So think of it like this. You are entering into an airplane, you've got the economy body pass, and you enter into a plane, but then you sneak your way into first class, which you did not pay for, which you do not normally have the right to enter into. And you start eating the food in the first class, you find a free seat, and you just lounge there, you cross your legs, they're serving you all the food, you're watching the TV in the nice, comfortable environment, but they can't tell that you were not supposed to be in first class. That's basically what escalation of privilege is. You're taking yourself away from the level you should normally have access to a level you should not normally have access to, based on your role, your job description, or based on the level of clearance or access you have. You should not have access to such information or such level of authorization or privilege or permission or right. But then you're able to take yourself away from the lower level to a higher level and execute even more powerful operations that somebody with your level of clearance should not be able to achieve. The same thing would happen if an attacker was able to break into your network and elevate their privilege levels. They will be able to carry things out within the security context of the active user account. And this is also one of the reasons it's important not to use your admin account for daily activities, because if an attacker does break into your network, or you make a mistake and you click on a file that you should not click on, guess what happens? The attack operates within the context of that active user, which is the admin account. So you're giving the attacker easy admin access to do things they should not normally be able to do. And you know what admin access can do. basically anything, right? That's it. So if I relate this back to the airplane, think about the pilot. The pilot is in charge of the plane. He's the captain. The pilot can determine who sits on the plane and who doesn't gain access to the plane. The pilot can kick someone off the plane. The pilot can ask for someone to be arrested because they're in charge of that plane. So the same with the admin account, if you're using your admin account for your daily activities and the attacker is also able to break in, they can do anything. So think of a terrorist breaking into the plane cockpit, which is where the pilot should normally be, right? The plane is going to obey any instruction given to it because the plane believes it's the pilot that is controlling it. The same with when you use an admin account and a hacker or an attacker breaks into your computer system. The computer obeys instructions. It's GIGO, garbage in, garbage out. It doesn't care who is operating it. As long as the attacker or the hacker is able to operate within the active context of that admin account, everything they do will be considered as the administrator is controlling me and I'm going to obey every single instruction. And therefore, that proves the point that any attack, any operation, any malware operates within the context of the active user account.